this past year, I was put in a cell with a lot of men, too many to tell. It was way too full and extremely cold. There were no beds, no mats, only the concrete floor. The lights were on all night. There was not enough room for everyone to lie down, so I had to hunch over while sitting and crumple up in a ball to try to sleep. I barely got any rest or sleep.
This is from siblings 16 and 14 years old, and their cousin who was 16 also. We have not received an explanation of the rules here.
I've only been allowed to bathe twice since we came here. My sister has only been allowed to bathe once. The water is very cold.
The guards get mad if a child needs to use the bathroom more than once in a short period of time. Instead of letting the child use the bathroom a second time, the guards just close the door. When the door is closed, no child is permitted to open it. All the time we must ask the guards for permission to open the door. They tell us it's the law.
Although we were used to seeing horrendous conditions in Border Patrol facilities, a lack of food, lack of beds, lack of hygiene, all of which violate the children's rights, the sheer number of children that we saw at this facility and the length of time that some of these children had been there. They routinely were kept there for not the maximum 72 hours that are allowed by law normally, but a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks without any meaningful adult care.
I don't think I have ever seen the government so blatantly target children before. I mean, to me, that is, you know, a lot of times it's under the cover of other issues, and we know that, you know, whether it's poor schooling, poor housing, homelessness, etc., we know that children oftentimes get the short shrift. But I've never, ever, ever in my 30-year pediatric career have seen the targeting of children like we are seeing under this administration. When we talk about the fear of parents being deported and the fear I see of children who don't want to go to school because they're afraid that their parents are not going to be home when they get home, I have never, ever seen this before in my life.
What I'm going to do is teach you a little bit about the health effects of these policies, short and long term. So if not to add to the urgency of the situation of these children, to give you all another arm of evidence that you can use in advocating to end the practice of separation and detention. So first I'm going to talk about something called toxic stress. There's positive stress, there's tolerable stress, and toxic stress. Toxic stress, then, is the excessive or prolonged activation of this physiologic stress response system in the absence of anybody to help these children buffer, protect them. So it's not adversity alone that predicts poor outcomes. So many children experience adversity, but it's the absence of our ability to protect our children and the relationships that allow them to have healthy adaptations to these bad situations.
Para mí decir que la política, eso es lo que me preocupa más de todo, es la política que se transporta de Estados Unidos a Latinoamérica, que puede afectar no solamente la gente en Estados Unidos, pero también la gente de Centroamérica.
The detention of children is harmful to them. And so if children come into the custody of the federal government, the first thing they need to be doing is to try to get them out, right? To try to reunify them with family or unify them with family or sponsors in the community. That children belong in the community with their families. That's the first piece of the Florida settlement, really the principle behind it, right? And then the next part is this recognition that there will be periods of time in which a migrant child who, for example, an unaccompanied child who arrives at a border alone is going to be in government custody, and what to do in those circumstances, right? And so then it lays out some of those guidelines and says, yes, you're going to try to reunify as soon as possible into a safe environment with family and the community. And in the meantime, you're going to only use facilities that are the least restrictive alternative possible and appropriate for that child. And that those facilities will be non-secure and licensed. Okay? And then it has another tiny piece that says, in the meantime, while you're processing at the border and trying to get them to those places, if you can't do it in those first initial hours, right, you can only hold them in those facilities for a maximum of 5 days, which was then lowered actually to 72 hours later. And that regardless, all of these facilities with your children have to be safe, secure facilities. You have to follow general child welfare principles, and there's some guidelines, more specifics, right, that include education for children if they're there over that initial few day period, bedding, food, medical care, recreation, etc. So it's really clear that what you heard described and what you see on these walls doesn't even come close to complying with any of those principles.
Well, they have to see where the father is going, who he's going to live with. They have to fingerprint the whole family. They have to do background checks on everybody, and so forth and so on. If they're lucky, they'll be out in 6 months. And when I had to tell the father and explain those rules to him, he about collapsed. How can I leave my daughter? I came with her. So what happened with the stopping of separation? We got together one day and said, some friends and I, we're going to help. And so we're going to establish an organization that we now call Team Brownsville. And we have volunteers there every day helping at the bus station, providing support to these children, some adults. We started feeding 40 people when we started that were there. And when MPP started Return to Mexico policy, our camp has grown to 2,500. Next comes Junior and Ed. Junior, his mother was killed, and so he took on the role of parent to Andy, which is 4 years old. Junior was 16 or 17 at the time. So when gang members tried to kill them from in Honduras, they come over to the U.S. But because it's not parent and child, it's brother, they're siblings. They don't count that as a family member, so they separated them. Junior crossed over, and they sent Andy to New York City, to that detention center there. And when he told me that story, crying, it's like, I raised this kid for 4 years by myself, and now he's taken away from me, never to see him again. That's when I contacted Immigrant Families Together, and they helped me find him. And they told me that he was already on the list to be adopted. Andy was. Can you imagine losing? And how many kids have been adopted when we know where the parents are, exactly where they are? And those are things that are happening every day. We managed to save Junior and Andy, to see them together again.
I was also scared because my niece was sick, and I didn't know how she was supposed to get better in that place that was so dirty and with so many other people. I wasn't able to sleep.
The stories that you've read and the pieces are heartbreaking. We also met some children who wouldn't talk.
What should the public know that is not really getting through to the public? Because I think the information is out there. Why doesn't the public seize on this? What is the specific role of artists? And can they make a difference? Is there a way to use art to break through?
A group of artists in the world reach out to you and say, well, what should we do? So with Warren and some other individuals, we started something called Project Amplify, and it was specifically to use the voices and the accounts of the children in their words to create a variety of public awareness and platforms that would preserve their words. And so with that, then, we took the accounts, contacted our friends and colleagues as artists and said, okay, here's the deal. These are the accounts. choose one, choose them all, but you will then make a work of art that will somehow incorporate that in some way.
A lot of artists have stepped up in this project, right? And I think it's one thing when we go, I've been doing this for a long time, going in and doing my report and going to Congress, and it's very sterile, right? It's facts, it's a lot of facts, and we really worry about the facts and getting the facts all right. But when people start feeling it emotionally, it's a whole different level of buying into it and identifying.
There's 4 things that you do, right? You raise public awareness, you vote, you contact your elected officials, you contact corporations, you contact people in power, and then you support, right? So you raise money or you volunteer or you do something.
And one piece of good news is that lawyers and nonprofits and volunteers and citizens can make a huge difference. We win these cases a bunch when we get involved, and we increase the odds that these families will win.
So to put a sort of positive spin on it, right, is the policies are cool. They are treated incredibly inhumanely. But there is still a resiliency there that is so admirable in light of that.
It's about how we welcome people into our communities and how we make people not see these populations as others.
It gives me a lot of hope that you're all here. And I want to contextualize this inside of Whitman-Walker as well, because this is a room that has been present for moments of radical honesty and radical kindnesses. And I'm so thrilled that it gets to be that place again in a new context.